Minister, one of the great levellers of Irish society has been the Leaving Certificate. No matter who you are or where you come from, when you sat the Leaving Certificate, you knew that when you went into the exam, your paper was going to be marked objectively and fairly, without any knowledge as to who you are or where you're from. In many respects, an outstanding student from Castleisland was going to be treated the same as an outstanding student from Castleknock. Unfortunately, this year that hasn't occurred. Obviously, it was as a result of the pandemic that new extraordinary measures had to be put in place. And to a large extent, those efforts were successful. However, there's a large contingent of student ministers who were treated very unfairly by the state in this process. And these were the students whose estimated grades provided by their teachers were marked down by the state during the standardisation process. And this was a decision made about these students which has had a huge impact on their lives. Very many of them, not only did they not get the first course that they were seeking to obtain, but they didn't even get the second, third or fourth. And had they received the marks that their teacher originally gave them, they would have been able to obtain those courses that they had at the top of their CAO system. So unfortunately, the CAO process, which is a very transparent process, has not become transparent as a result of this. I have spoken to so many parents and children over the past number of days that I couldn't go into the full detail, which it would take me so long. But you'll no doubt be aware, Minister, that there's huge levels of upset there about what happened to these students. They were treated unfairly. It appears to be the case that these students, who were students of schools that previously excelled in the Leaving Certificate, were downgraded because of that school's excellence. And that's not fair. And I think, Minister, the state needs to acknowledge that these students were treated unfairly, and we need to recognise and try to examine what can we do for them.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Minister, thanks for being here in person. Particularly, you carry a great burden at this time, the burden of office of looking after and ensuring the smooth running, insofar as it's possible, of our primary and second level education system during the most extraordinarily challenging times. And the country, and certainly your party colleagues and everybody in the Dáil, is grateful for the job and the manner in which you've taken on that task. Deputy O'Callaghan has, in his usual erudite way, made most of the points that I want to make, including the points of the Leaving Cert being a great leveller. Historically as well, of course, Minister, you know, there was the suspicion on the other side of the coin in previous years that if you came from a disadvantaged area and went to a school where there were a high proportion of pupils who came from so-called disadvantaged areas, that they had equally been unfairly penalised in the way Leaving Cert results had been marked or calculated, well, not calculated, but marked in previous years. So, to some degree, we're looking at the reverse side of that coin, and it needs to be treated, as Deputy O'Callaghan said, with the same importance and urgency that would have been the disadvantaged pupils would have perhaps not been treated with in the past. But it has highlighted it, the predicted grading, which has gone enormously well, and you and your department deserve great plaudits for that, appears to have been unfair on some students who appear to have come disproportionately from schools who had achieved excellent results in previous years. So I'm looking forward to hear what your response is. I'm no doubt it will be measured, and this is in the context of threatened High Court proceedings and appeals, etc. So we're grateful again for your presence, Minister, and looking forward to hear your response on it.
Thank you to the deputies for raising this issue and allowing me the opportunity to address the matter. Firstly, I would like to say that the provision of calculated grades to students arose, as you would all be aware, in the unprecedented circumstances of not being able to run the Leaving Certificate examination. The concept was first mooted by students, and there was an extensive process of engagement with education stakeholders and agreement to proceed with the calculated grades process. Under the model, estimated marks from schools were adjusted using a carefully developed standardisation model to ensure that a consistent standard was applied across schools across the country when judging the performance of students. Standardisation takes place every year in the Leaving Certificate examination, and I think that is an extremely important point. While teachers are familiar with their own students, they cannot be expected to have knowledge of standards nationwide. So standardisation allows student-to-student comparability across the country. As you may be aware, at the start of September, I brought to Cabinet a proposal to remove school-by-school historical subject-level data from the national standardisation process used to determine calculated grades. This decision meant that no student's calculated grade was impacted by the historic performance of the school they attended. The statistical procedure has been subject to a high degree of oversight by the National Standardisation Group, which was established to oversee the work. Its implementation has also been independently overseen by an independent steering committee, chaired by Dr Anya Lawler, former Director of the Teaching Council. All information is fully transparent regarding the process and oversight of the process, and it is available online on gov.ie. As you will know, as part of the process, schools provided the department with an estimated percentage mark and rank order for each student. Following the standardisation process, the estimated percentage mark was converted to a calculated mark and subsequently to a calculated grade. This was provided to students on the 7th of September. It is only at this point that students were awarded a grade. It is not accurate to state that students were downgraded or upgraded through the standardisation process. Rather, the grade that was awarded following the standardisation process is the grade for the 2020 Leaving Certificate calculated grades. The system of calculated grades allowed the department to provide results to over 60,000 students, many of whom have now received CAO round 1 offers. 80% of the CAO applicants received a CAO offer from their top 3 preferences. Of all grades awarded, 83.1% were either the same or higher than the grade that school estimated percentage marks would have awarded, while 16.9% were lower. The increase of 4.4 percentage points in the average marks across all subjects and at all levels this year is present across all types of schools. However, it was inevitable that some students would have their estimated marks adjusted downwards as part of standardisation. The overall data from school estimated marks show that there was a very significant rise in estimated grades against what would normally be achieved nationally in examinations. Without standardisation, in some subjects, the number of H1s awarded would have been 2 or 3 times higher. This situation would not have been tenable and would have presented considerable difficulties for higher and further education. While some students had a lower percentage mark awarded following standardisation, it is possible that many of the concerns being raised are based on what marks schools estimated for their students this year, rather than on the results attained in examinations across previous years. And I believe this is the point that has been made by the previous speakers. The standardisation process was applied to all schools in the same way, irrespective of whether the school was in the state system or not, or whether it was fee charging or not. With regard to schools outside the state system, data analysis in the report of the National Standardisation Group shows that schools in the non-recognised category, which is made up largely of institutions often referred to as grind schools, overestimated their student marks to a greater extent than happened in recognised schools. Furthermore, comparing the results of students in fee-charging schools, in the state sector and in the private non-recognised schools institutes, versus those in non-fee-charging schools, those in fee-charging schools and institutions still have scores that are higher than students in non-fee charging schools, even after standardisation. Students who are disappointed with one or more of their calculated grades had the opportunity to submit an appeal. The appeals process closed yesterday, Wednesday, the 16th of September at 5 p.m. The appeals process is a process review focused on looking for errors in the transmission and processing of student data through the process.
The deputies have a minute each. Deputy Callan.
Minister, thanks very much for your considered reply in respect to this matter. I note that you state in your reply that it's not accurate to state that schools or certain students were downgraded, but that's how the students see it, Minister. When they got last Monday the estimated grades given to them by their teachers, and then they learn that those were above what they got in the official calculated grades, they view that as being downgraded. Now, I recognise this is an exceptional event, and I think one thing we can learn from this is that we need to get back to the Leaving Certificate as it usually operates, because no matter what the unfairness of the Leaving Certificate may be, it is an objective and fair system of assessing academic ability. I'd also like to know, Minister, what's going to happen in this appeal process. There's a huge amount of uncertainty as to what is involved and who will be making the assessments under the appeals. Is it just purely a clerical appeal, or is there some further facility available to the students who put it in? And I also think, Minister, we should acknowledge the upset that has been felt by these students. I had a woman on the phone to me today who told me that she wasn't prepared to leave the house. She was so concerned at how upset her son has been since he got his results. And that's across the board. It's not just in certain schools or in certain counties. I've spoken to colleagues in this House, and this is an issue throughout the country. And I think we need to recognise the unfairness that these students believe they've been subjected to.
Minister, there's quite a lot to digest in your response, and I'm grateful for the detail you went into in such a short period of time. I take on board, as everybody does, and look, it is worthy of repetition, that faced with an unprecedented set of circumstances, your department moved quickly and came up with a system that has attempted successfully, for the most part, clearly, and we don't want to lose sight of that, in dealing with the set of circumstances it was faced and with the challenges faced by the students. And you are right to emphasise, we all knew it as public representatives at the time, that this was student-led. And as is there a movement at the moment in the present sixth years in relation to how they will be treated next year, so some lessons to be learned from here as well. I would like to know, in the very short time that you have left to you, maybe if you could give us some details, my colleague said about, in relation to the appeals process. Have you any idea, given the closing time was yesterday, have any idea yet in relation to the nature of the appeals, the amount of the appeals, what kind of cohort of school or schools they're coming from? And I think that is an interesting finding in relation to the so-called non-state schools, the grind schools. It's very sobering fact, and you've presented it as a fact, and something that parents may bear in mind actually as they go forward, because this, the success of this depended completely on objectivity as much as possible. But I think there are some questions to be answered, and I look forward to your second response on this and maybe some further correspondence in relation to this as well.
I suppose just to reiterate and to point out again that the development of the model for calculated grades has been a challenging process and would not have been possible without the cooperation of teachers and schools, and I do absolutely want to acknowledge that. For students who are disappointed with their results, the opportunity to avail of the appeals mechanism to ensure there was no administrative errors in processing their results was, as I've already outlined, provided to them. And I do appreciate that, you know, in every examination system and in every leaving certificate system, as we're aware, there are students who will be very happy and there will also be students who are very disappointed. And I absolutely want to acknowledge that, and I want to acknowledge, you know, that it has an impact on entire households in circumstances of that nature too. And I am very, very aware and very cognizant of that. I'd also like to point out and reiterate once again that students do have the opportunity to sit the postponed examinations in November. And I do think this is an important avenue that is open to students should they wish to avail of it. Again, I think it's important to point out that this year the CEO was able to make 78,950 first-round offers last Friday, 6% higher than in 2019, while overall CEO applications were up only 0.6% as a result of additional places being made available by government. This means that many more students will have received a CEO offer. 52% of students received an offer for their first preference course, while 80%, as I previously have said, received an offer for a top 3 preference. And again, I think, given that we are in the midst of a pandemic and given the extraordinary circumstances in which we find ourselves, I think it is an extraordinarily positive reflection that so many students were in a position to avail of those and take up those offers. As I said, inevitably there will be students and parents who remain dissatisfied with the outcome of the calculated grades and CAO process. Every year there are students who miss out on CAO places, as more students seek places than there are actually places available. I would, however, encourage those students to explore the options available to them to achieve their goals and ambitions, and I wish them well. And again, I do recognise that it can be a very difficult time for everybody involved, but it was an extraordinary circumstance that meant we had to introduce an extraordinary measure, and that was the agreed measure of calculated grades.